Welcome, dear friends, to my show, Book Review. The book for today is A Madman's Diary, written by Lu Xun. He's a Chinese author. A Madman's Diary is a short story published in 1918. Lu Xun was the pen name of Zhou Shuren, born 25th September 1881, and he died on 19th October 1936. He was a Chinese writer, essayist, poet, and a literary critic. He was a leading figure of modern Chinese literature. The history of Chinese literature extends thousands of years, from the earliest recorded dynastic court archives to the mature vernacular fiction novels that arose during the Ming dynasty to entertain the masses of literate Chinese. It is also known as Baihua in the forms of written Chinese based on the varieties of Chinese spoken throughout China. In contrast to the classical Chinese, the written standard used during imperial China up to the earlier 20th century, a written vernacular based on the Mandarin Chinese was used in novels in the Ming and Ching dynasties and later refined by intellectuals associated with the May 4th movement, a Chinese anti-imperialist cultural and political movement which grew out of students' protests in Beijing on 4th May 1919. The introduction of widespread woodblock printing during the Tang dynasty during the period 618 to 1907 and the invention of the movable type printing by Beijing during 1990 to 1051 during the Song dynasty between 1960 to 1279 rapidly spread written knowledge throughout China. In more modern times, the author Lu Xun, 1881 to 1936, is considered an influential voice of Baihua literature in China. Writing in vernacular and classical Chinese, he was a short story writer, editor, translator, literary critic, essayist, poet, and a designer. In the 1930s, he became the titular head of the League of Left-Wing Writers in Shanghai. Lu Xun was born into a family of landlords and government officials in Shaoxing, Zhejiang, difficult names to pronounce. The family's financial resources declined over the course of his youth. Lu aspired to take the imperial civil service, but due to his family's relative poverty, he was forced to attend government-funded schools teaching Western education. Upon graduation, Lu went to medical school in Japan, but later dropped out. He became interested in studying literature, but was eventually forced to return to China because of his family's lack of funds. After returning to China, Lu worked for several years teaching at local secondary schools and colleges before finally finding a job at the Republic of China Ministry of Education. After the 1919 May 4th movement, Lu Xun's writing began to exert a substantial influence on Chinese literature and popular culture. Like many leaders of the May 4th movement, he was primarily a leftist. He was highly acclaimed by the Chinese government after 1949. When the People's Republic of China was founded, Mao Zedong himself became a lifelong admirer of Lu Xun's writing. Diary of a Madman was the first and the most influential modern work written in vernacular Chinese in the Republic era. It is placed first in Call to Arms, a collection of short stories by Lu Xun. The story was often referred to as China's first modern short story. This book was selected as one of the 100 best books in the history of Baihua World Library. The title of Madman's Diary of Lu Xun was inspired by Nikolai Gogol's short story Diary of a Madman, as was the idea of the madman who sees reality more clearly than those around him. The madman sees cannibalism both in his family and the village around, and he then finds cannibalism in the Confucian classics, which had long been credited with humanistic concern for the mutual obligations of society, and thus for the superiority of Confucian civilization. The story was read as an ironic attack on traditional Chinese culture and a call for a new culture. Far from its success and dominance in Chinese literature, Lu Xun's stories took 5 years before it was widely recognized as a notable piece of writing. Before he published the diary, Lu Xun was hopeless and in complete despair. His state of mind was unknown to the readers while he was writing the diary, except to the few individuals who were close to him. The theme of cannibalism in notion, eating oneself, sparked intrigue and criticism among the readers due to its ambiguity and come across as very strong, controversial talking point. The author's attempt to cure the cultural malaise exists in Chinese tradition through his writings was not easily embraced by the readers. However, the unprecedented nature of the story and its silent arrival captures the attention of many authors and spectators. Overall, it serves as an account of historical change and biting social satire. Lu Xun's short stories were recognized as a significant work of Chinese modern classics as it evokes a power struggle, social structure, and issues in political sphere. The story presents itself as diary entries in vernacular Chinese of a madman who, according to the foreword written in classical Chinese, has now been cured of his paranoia after extensively studying the 4 books and 5 classics of old Confucian culture. The diary writer, the supposed madman, begins to see the words "eat people" written between the lines of the text. In classical Chinese text, commentary was placed between the lines of the text rather than in the notes at the bottom of a page. Seeing the people in his village as potential man-eaters, he is gripped by the fear that everyone, including his brother, his venerable doctor, and his neighbors who are crowding about watching him are harboring cannibalistic thoughts on him. Despite the brother's apparently genuine concern, the narrator still regards him as a big threat, as big as any stranger. Towards the end, the narrator turns his concern to the younger generation, especially his late sister who died when she was 5, as he is afraid they will be cannibalized. But then he is convinced that his late sister had been eaten up by his brother and that he might have unwittingly tasted of flesh. The story ends with the famous line, "Save the children." So that was A Madman's Diary. Goodbye and see you soon.